Another question
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about, just to kind of pivot a little bit. I want to talk a bit about like electoralism versus anti-electoralism. Recently, you did a pretty interesting discussion, I thought, on Bad Faith podcast with Brianna Joy Gray, where you guys got into some stuff in related topics, third parties versus like progressives running as Democrats and all that stuff. And I think it's just kind of indicative of a larger split that we've seen emerge in the post Bernie Sanders era online. And again, like I said, it seems like there's a decent amount of people that are just totally fed up with the lack of progress from within the Democratic Party, middling results from the elected squad members, and so on and so forth. And therefore, they've
Yeah.
decided that it's not worth their time to support politicians running as progressives or socialists, especially within the Democratic Party. But some kind of just feel like overall, like, just screw it. Like, why even support any politician ever? And while I am sympathetic to a lot of the kind of broader critiques of electoralism, especially at a national level, what I do worry a lot about is people on the left abandoning electoralism overall, which I think would be disastrous on a local level. Like if you look at city council races, state legislatures, mayoral elections, etc., I think it's very important to participate in these elections and make sure that like non-corporate people that are actually going to represent the working class community of whatever community that you come from, I think it's important that those people get elected to those more local level positions. And I think that that has a massive impact on policies like gentrification in specific. Something we see here a lot in Kansas City is these big developers coming in, buying out properties, pricing out people that have lived here their entire lives. And obviously that's happening in basically every city across the country. And again, I'm worried that if the left, the progressive socialist left, just kind of gives up and, walks away with our tail tucked between our legs, then we're just letting the corporations win. We're just letting the, corporate right win in this country on all of these very important issues at all levels of government. So what's your thoughts on all that?
I think that's a great point, Gavin, and one that I probably haven't made enough because, I mean, look at what just happened in Florida. Ron DeSantis helped to engineer the right wing takeover of a number of school boards there, and we know the sorts of like crazy policies that they have been pushing. So the right certainly is not anti-electoralism. They've had a multi-decade project to take over school boards, boards of supervisors, local mayors, whatever the sort of local governing body is, not to mention state legislatures, which is why, we're in such a terrible position now with Roe being overturned in so many states across the country because this program has been phenomenally successful. And these policies that are being passed at the local and state level are incredibly consequential for people's lives. So that's a phenomenal point. I'll also say at the federal level, I mean, for me, even if you think that everything Biden's done has been shit, which I don't think is fair at this point. I think, the student loan relief, I'd like it to be more, et cetera, et cetera. It's a real break with neoliberalism. It's a genuine idea that came from Occupy, went to the Jill Stein campaign, went through the Bernie campaign as sort of mainstream, and now has been forced into execution by a president who really didn't want to do it. I think that's an important and powerful example. But even beyond that, to me, the NLRB is as important an issue as anything. So it's the National Labor Relations Board. It governs, these union elections. And when right-wing governments are in power, including right-wing Democrats, but especially when the Republicans are in power, the NLRB is extraordinarily hostile to workers who are trying to organize and just trying to have their rights recognized. If you don't have this NLRB in place when the Amazon organizing and Starbucks organizing in particular is going on, those fights never happen. They never get off the ground because this NLRB actually does its job in, upholding workers' rights. They had made some key decisions early on in those drives that basically made them possible. So I can't imagine anyone on the left saying like we shouldn't be doing everything we can to support and, push forward the grassroots labor movement, which is the most hopeful thing that's happening right now. That doesn't happen if you don't have Biden's NLRB in. So for me, if I just look at that one thing, it says, okay, you've got to engage in electoralism and you have to, do the best that you can with the options that we have, even while recognizing how woefully inadequate it ultimately is.
Zach and I live in Kansas City, Missouri now, but we both grew up in Kansas on the other side of the border. And, we're about to vote here in Missouri on legalizing cannabis at a recreational level. It's already legal at a medicinal level in Missouri. But that's luckily going to be a ballot initiative that I think will pass pretty easily here in Missouri. However, in Kansas, they don't even have the ability to get a ballot measure on. the ballot.
Wow.
That's not a thing. The only reason they were able to get the abortion one on there was because it was like an amendment to the state constitution that was being proposed. But they really don't even have the option in any way, shape, or form to get voting on something like legal cannabis on the ballot as a ballot initiative, which is insanely anti-democratic. And the reason, and they won't even vote on it in the state legislature because it's completely controlled by Republicans. They won't even let it through, despite the best attempts of activists and lobbyists alike. Even the corporate lobbyists can't get the Republican majority legislature in Kansas to do anything about this. They won't even bring it to a vote. So again, that's another issue where I'm like, yeah, I agree that to some extent, elections and politicians, it's kind of like a bourgeois concern or whatever, but it also does manifest in very serious ways where it's like, I'm not a rah-rah Democrat, like go vote blue no matter who kind of guy, but you see obvious instances here of a Republican-controlled state legislature just totally blocking progress. And if you're a cancer patient or have epilepsy or something like that in Kansas, it's literally illegal to treat these conditions with cannabis, which is a medicine. I just find that unconscionable. I can't believe the disconnect between people just abandon electoralism completely. It's like, well, then you have to accept these results.
Yeah, and I understand where it comes from. I genuinely do, because people, they put their hearts on the line and they had their hearts broken multiple times, with Bernie twice, with putting, investing a lot of hopes in the squad that they would be more adversarial with the Democratic establishment. So I'm genuinely sympathetic to that feeling. I just don't think we can really afford to indulge in that, because the stakes are really high and because there are legitimate, like very tangible things that are on the line. Including the fate of this new burgeoning labor movement, which is so encouraging. And which, listen, if there was a real like growing grassroots mass labor movement in this country at the time that Bernie runs in 2016, for example, I think we're talking about a different story. You can't have the sort of left electoral result that you ultimately want without having that grassroots mobilization of the working class that was absent for 2016 and 2020. We could be in the early stages of building that now. We have these little green shoots, but it really does require that you have an administration that is not just going to snuff it out, which they can very easily do.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And my follow up to that is just how do we, on left media, what do you think the messaging looks like for that? Because obviously, I'm pissed off at Bernie for like 10 ways to Sunday, right? All the things that I think he should have done better or whatever. And there's a lot of people that are frustrated about that too. I happen to share your and Gavin's perspective that we need to, kind of set that aside and keep marching forward and like learn from those mistakes and better ourselves. But a lot of people have thrown their hands in the air and said, I'm exclusively like a mutual aid person. It's like, you don't want to diminish the work of mutual aid. Of course, that's very important and it's valuable work. But I think you made a great point that right now we're on the precipice of what could be another, Bernie Sanders wave, right? And in this one, I think a lot more tangible for a lot of really working class folks. Like if you're unionizing at work, one of the Starbucks is near Gavin and I, they were one of the big unionized stores. It created a real fire. I mean, people were rallying behind them, going to see them at work, all these different kinds of things. It's exciting for people around town. It kind of has that same energy that the Bernie Sanders thing did, right? You feel like you're a part of something. You feel like you can make a change and, you want to like, these guys like, let's just buy an order, tip $10 and not go pick it up, kind of like shit. That's what people were doing. It was really cool to see. And I just wish that we could, on left media, get people as amped about this as everybody was during 2016. I mean, Bernie Sanders on YouTube lit a fucking firestorm that nobody could believe. I mean, probably nobody knows that better than Kyle. Just one of the biggest voices for Bernie Sanders on the internet at that time. And it was a massive, massive wave of people. And I'm just wondering if you have any ideas on how we can, use our platforms here to really make people understand it's like, all right, it's not coming in the same electoral, this guy becomes president, now we have a face for everything. This is actually that real burgeoning working class festering energy that builds something real and sustained and long term, because it's almost like that leaderless movement people have been asking for. Obviously, there are individual leaders like the gentleman you mentioned from Home Depot, like Chris Smalls over at Amazon, but they are all pieces of a puzzle. It's not just like, how are we all getting behind one man? You know what I'm saying? So I just wonder what your thoughts are on it.
Well, I don't know if this exactly answers your question, but I think there's a really hopeful story to look at right now, which is, I mean, you had the financial crash and you had one sort of like right wing response to that, which is the Tea Party and ultimately Trumpism and crypto. I would throw in as sort of like a right wing response to that. And then you had the left wing response, which was Occupy, and Occupy grows into like a real left movement that didn't really, exist in this sort of like mainstream way in my lifetime up to that point. Grows into the Bernie campaign, 2016, 2020 grows into things like Justice Democrats and the efforts to hold Democrats accountable for the left and push Democrats on the left. I don't know if you saw the research about how even when left candidates lose their primaries, they still force the candidates they're up against to the left, and that has had a market impact on the House in particular. So that's important to keep in mind. But you look at the way these things build on each other. So you have, Occupy, you have Bernie's campaign that really mainstreams a lot of these ideas. Bernie, as you're mentioning with Kyle and others, I mean, all of us are existing in independent media right now because of Bernie Sanders, right? Without him, there isn't this independent left ecosystem whatsoever. Even as the right wingers still get more clicks, but there's a thing now, it exists, right? And then you have out of also, the stirrings of all of these forces, a lot of the early worker organizers, especially at Starbucks, these were Bernie people, and maybe not maybe not on the campus, but they were volunteers, they were supporters. And so he introduced this idea of, hey, don't quit your job, and you're not worthless. You are worthy, and you do deserve to be treated with humanity. And there are these things like called labor unions that you can affiliate with and organize to join, so that you have a voice in your workplace. Like, these things all build on each other. So to me, that's an incredibly, incredibly hopeful story about how we went from Occupy to this place now where, yeah, there have been a number of like really disappointing and ultimately heartbreaking electoral defeats, but you can see how out of the ashes of those some positive things started to grow. So that's what I try to look at, so as not to get like depressed or nihilistic or think there's never a chance and we can never do those things. And then if those pieces grow out, you can imagine with vibrant independent media ecosystem that isn't just trying to kneecap the next left candidate at every turn, with a vibrant and growing grassroots labor movement that's looking at working class interests and centering those things and evaluating candidates on those merits, you can imagine how then next time around it could potentially be different, because you've grown power sources that are outside of the establishment Democrat and the establishment Republican parties.